downtown.
Hey, Mr. Jerbick, you're on.
Thank you. I didn't know how to follow that up. The free speech is a wonderful thing. Just a real quick observation, then I want to touch on some of the comments here. And I think everybody on this dais knows it, everybody in the audience knows it, and we talked about it at the BuskLV meeting. The First Amendment does not exist for speech that we agree with. We wouldn't need a First Amendment if that were the case. The First Amendment exists for speech we disagree with, and it protects individuals who have opinions different to us and who, in this particular case, may perform differently than some people may want to tolerate or like. And so, having said that, let me add to it. If this is a problem that can be self-regulated, you ought not do an ordinance. I'll be the first to tell you that. You can only do this ordinance.
Oh, boy.
Mr. Jerbick, you're getting a standing ovation. I don't think Mr. Jerbick has ever had a standing ovation from the audience.
The individuals who spoke are absolutely correct in this respect. Governments do not get involved with regulating speech in any way, shape, or form unless it's the least restrictive thing possible. And so if there is something out there that we're unaware of, I'm all ears and anxious to listen to it. Let me make a few observations that some people will like and some I will not get applause for. Let me talk first about sound levels. The sound levels that are in this ordinance are kind of bifurcated. They are the sound levels right out of the Santa Monica ordinance. There's a louder decibel level and a less loud decibel level. I can tell Mr. Flowers right now that if we just want to go with 85 decibels instead of 75, 24 hours a day, we're fine with that. We do not have a dog in that fight, but we do need to have a certain decibel level so we don't have one performer performing over the another performer. And equally importantly, we also have things going on out there. We have individuals that are paying good money for kiosks. We have individuals that need to be able to hear their customers when they say they want to buy something and tell them how much it is. So these decibel levels, I think, are reasonably related to a compelling governmental interest. And I think there's some room for debate there. But if it's the higher decibel level, 24/7, I think we're fine with that. Why 38 spots as opposed to the 45 that Mr. Flowers spoke of? Mr. Flowers may well be right. He provided me with a map where he showed the ability to get as many as 45 spots on the pedestrian mall, and that's not including the 3rd Street portion of the pedestrian mall. I provided that map to Mr. Victor, who said, yes, some of the spots may work, some of them don't work. I don't know, so I was certainly willing to say at a minimum, we're doing 38 spots. And Mr. Flowers, I'll put it on the record, if we could do 45, if we could do 105, we'll do it. Here's how we get the number, and it's not arbitrary. And I've spoken to Fremont Street as well. We are trying to maximize the number of performance zones in the pedestrian mall. But those performance zones have got some limitations. If you suddenly start putting them 10 feet away from kiosks and 10 feet away from doorways and from ATMs and fire lanes and things like that, you literally get a finite amount of performance zones. And if there's a way to fit more in there with those restrictions, we'll do it. That has been a promise we've made from day one. One of the early meetings we had was at the Fremont Street Experience back in the days when performance zones weren't drawn on a map as neatly as they are on the map before you today, but we had pennies about the same size as performance zones. And we invited people at the table, see how many you can fit in here. The more, the better. But at some point in time, you reach a maximum number, and we say a minimum of 38 is possible. Again, if we could do 48, 58, or 68, that would be desirable. And so it's not a desire to limit these zones, it's a desire to maximize them, and that's where we came up with the number. When it comes to reservation, believe me, everybody who's here today that has talked about the burden of reservation is accurate. I can't tell you that it would not be a burden on a performer to have to know at a particular time in advance where to be, how long they can be there, and the like. That's why this is going to be subject to strict scrutiny by a court if adopted. You're going to look at whether or not you adopted the least restrictive regulation possible. That's why in the last few days, the idea of lottery, not that it's perfect either, has become an option, not that it's written in stone in this ordinance right now, but it does have some advantages over a get in line and reserve your spot strategy. Let's talk through a couple of things we talked through so you can understand the internal dialogue that we had. The first one was What if you have a reservation system for registered individuals? How does that work? One, you go online and you reserve in advance. Well, individuals who don't have the income to afford a computer or access to technology would be denied the opportunity to reserve. Two, we wouldn't have any way of knowing that you didn't pick 4 or 5 different reservation or registration names, and you could go on and start booking these things up and preclude other people from using them. So then we thought, let's have people only do it in person every day at the downtown registration booth. It could also be a reservation booth. And then how would that work? First person in line, whatever time you pick, 12, noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock the moment it begins, whatever time you pick, can one person get there first and start reserving them all night long. And then the thought became, well, that person would get in line and they would reserve maybe space number 1. Then they would go to the back of the line and the next person could reserve space number 2. Then they would go to the back of the line, and when their turn came again, they could pick another space. And that seemed almost uncontrollable and a little silly, and a burden too on the performers. And so we're kind of looking more actively right now, and I want input from the performers. And again, nothing's going to be perfect here. And if everybody's really looking for a 50-50, there's going to have to be a little give on everybody's part. Would be a lottery. And a lottery would be something that would look like this. And this is the way it works in Venice Beach. Once you're registered, your name goes into basically a computer that just spits out randomly what space you're assigned to for that 2 hours, and then the next 2 hours, and the next 2 hours. Again, not perfect, but the beauty of that is a performer would know a day in advance exactly where they would be every 2-hour period. And that would give everybody an opportunity to not waste time standing in line or putting on makeup or whatever. Again, none of these are perfect, but that seems to be one that the courts in California approved of recently, and it certainly has the quality of not picking speech. It's completely content neutral.
Why 2 hours?
Why 2 hours? Let's start with the absurd end, no hours. 38 spots, no hour rotation at all. You have 38 performers a night, and nobody else gets to perform other than those 38. If you pick 1 hour, individuals have come to me, and that's where we started. We started with 1 hour, which is what Santa Monica started with. Individuals say, my act is a little different than an individual who can just walk from one space to another. That individual, the downtime is how long it takes for you to walk from space 1 to space 20. But what if I have equipment? What if I have a table? What if I have a magic act? What if I have a musical act? I have take up and setup time. And that's a valid point. And so we moved from 1 hour to 2 hours to give an individual more time for that take up and set down. We're just starting with a number here. If you think there's a better number, 3 hours, 4 hours, no matter what you set it at, there's going to be a push on another part of the First Amendment. The lower you set the time, the more opportunity for more performers. The longer you set the time, the more opportunity to move, but the less opportunity to have more people compete for those spaces. That's the tension going on here. And whatever decision or direction you give me, we will follow. But I respect the opinion of the individuals here today. They're exactly right. They're not all alike when it comes to the type of performances that are going on Fremont Street or anywhere else. Why not buy the property and privatize it? Mayor, you and I have had that discussion many, many times. Let me go back in time and explain some realities we have to live with legally. That is a street before it became the Fremont Street Experience pedestrian wall. And streets are not things cities can sell. What you do is you do something called vacation. You vacate your interest in a street. So if, for instance, the city had no use for Clark Street in front of City Hall anymore, we would give notice to the public, we would have a hearing, it would go to the Planning Commission, and eventually to the council, and we'd vacate our interest. And that would look something like this. You have a street with a curb here and a curb here and a center line down the middle. If you vacate your interest, everything from the center line to the curb goes to the abutting property owner on one side and the abutting property owner on the other side. So why didn't we vacate Fremont Street, and it goes to the hotel casinos and they just run it? Because the hotel casinos don't have all the property on both sides of the street. In fact, some of them don't have the property at all on their side of the street. They have leasehold interests. Under Binion's at one point in time, there were 10 or more, maybe 20 or more leasehold interests. And I see Councilman Coffin nodding because he knows the history of downtown. There are a lot of parcels downtown the hotels don't own. And so these individuals that have the leasehold would get the property if there was a vacation of the street. And now you would and then on top of that, you have a whole bunch of property that isn't even controlled by a casino, by leasehold or by fee. You've got souvenir stores, you've got bars, you've got a strip club, you've got little other things that have nothing to do with the casinos that run and manage and pay for the Fremont Street experience. So vacation of the street is the only way to get rid of it. Vacation results in not 6 controlling properties running Fremont Street experience, but 80 people, 60 people, 50 people whose interests are definitely not aligned. And talk about herding cats, that would just not be a possible thing to have happen. Some would want to pay for Fremont Street like the hotels do now, some may not. Some may want to build right to the center line, and they could. It'd be their private property. So vacation and privatization, I would like to bury once and for all as an option. It just is not possible. So, since it cannot be privatized in the sense that any other thing can be privatized, like selling your property to somebody private to private, and it has to remain publicly owned, and let me state for the record, the public owns the dirt under that mall. And as a result of that ownership, the court has said it is a traditional public forum. Now, whether or not it's as traditional as a city park or as traditional as a sidewalk or something else, I don't know, but it's certainly subject to First Amendment expression. And that, given that reality, we have to live with what the Constitution says. Why not a union? Why not a union? We can't, we're not in a negotiating position with a union. This is not an employer-employee relationship. These are individuals who perform for either pleasure or for donations. And if they join a union or not, we're not the employer. So it's not like I am the golden nugget and you're the culinary and we have to have a collective bargaining agreement and we're subject to all the Nevada laws. A union would have no relationship with the city of Las Vegas, nor should it. Nor should it. Because if a union negotiated with us for performance rights for their members, what about the performance rights of citizens who aren't members? So a union is not the answer to this problem. A union may very well contribute to a higher quality of performance if that is something that is desired by the union members. It may create rules that are enforced within the union itself, and those are all good things. But the fact of the matter is that a union downtown is only going to benefit the people who are members of it, and we cannot compel membership, and a union is not going to solve this problem. So what we have to do is look at this problem holistically, whether you're a union member or you're a person who performs for children blowing balloons, or you're an individual on the other extreme end that is out wearing little clothing and getting laughs from people. It matters not in the eyes of the Constitution. You are the same, entitled to the same opportunity, entitled to the same rights under law. And having said that, I know there's a number of things out there that are probably still up for discussion, but I think right now this is clearly the heart of this ordinance. And there's a vital piece that we're going to introduce at the next meeting. That's not a new portion of the ordinance. I'm not telling anybody in the audience we're going to introduce new language, but we're going to introduce testimony that you haven't heard. This will be testimony from individuals who have kiosks that have had issues, individuals in law enforcement who have had issues, individuals in Fremont Street security who've had issues, and individual citizens as well as street performers themselves that may have had issues. This is a difficult decision. It's a very, very difficult decision, but it should be. When people's constitutional rights are involved, it should be. And this give and take, I think, has been valuable, not just for my office and learning from individuals who are affected by it, but I hope for the council as well.
Absolutely.
And with that, I'll stop, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I have one question, but I think we need to turn to Councilman Barlow for a motion on this. Actually, I have 2 questions. If this ordinance or some part or revised ordinance is enforced or is put out there and adopted by the council, and I am a street performer who decides I'm not going to go in a circle, I'm brand new to town, what then?
Let me tell you, that's why it's a very good question, and that's why there's serious consequences to doing this. This is a misdemeanor offense, and a misdemeanor offense can be anything from a warning. Those of you who've been pulled over for speeding, who've been lucky enough to be warned, know that an officer of the law doesn't always have to give you a ticket or always react with that kind of enforcement. It could be if the officer decides to issue a criminal citation, they could. And because misdemeanors committed in the presence of a law enforcement officer may be cause for arrest could occur. And that would all be determined by the officer involved. And I'm telling you what the answer to your question is, Your Honor. What would happen to an individual who violated the law, that would be criminal penalty is the ultimate punishment for violating the law.
Okay, and for anyone who has further questions, comments, again, B. Jerbick at lasvegasnevada.gov.
GOV.
And assuming that Councilman Barlow, at recommendation, is going to ask for an abeyance until, you will be coming back at that time with the changes that you have already stipulated, that it's the minimum of 38, right. And you will say that clearly, that it could be as many can fit, and also to change the decimals that will go in the revised.
Correct. The only thing that I would want to make clear is most of the things I just said are just clarification. The 38 minimums in there right now. I'm just for Mr. Flowers and everybody else to let you know that if we can get more, we will. The only reason the 45 isn't in there is we're not sure 45 is actually the number. But if Mr. Flowers is right, all the more power to him. We'll do as many spaces as possible. Okay. The only change that I'm saying today that you will see in the next draft will be a fixed decibel level. And in fairness to everybody here, we'll pick the higher decibel level. And that'll make it simple and clean, and we won't have to debate whether you should have more sound at night than during the day.
Thank you for all your efforts, all your meetings, all the hours you've been spending on this for all these years that you've been with us, and I know it goes back a long way. But if we keep working together as one, we will come to a good resolution. We will have great performances on Fremont Street and protect the rights of our individuals. And hopefully it will be a place where everybody wants to come because we love our city and downtown. So at this point, I'm going to ask for a motion, please, from Councilman Barlow, and let's move on with the agenda because we have people who've been waiting here.
Madam Mayor, just one clarification on this, if I could, please. You are going to also consider some of the thoughts that were brought up today as you do any remodeling with your ordinance.
Yes, I will.
You hadn't mentioned.
Oh, sorry.
I will meet with the sponsors of the bill, first of all, because I will meet with the sponsors of the bill to discuss with them if there are things within these comments. Again, that's why I wanted to respond on the record. If on the 16th of September we come back and there are very little changes shown, I wanted to, with respect to all the people here, to look them in the eye and say, there's a reason. There's a reason a union doesn't work, and it would never be in an ordinance. I'm telling everybody that right now. That's not going to be in a draft in the future. That is selecting speech represented by some people and excluding speech not represented by people. And that is not permissible. So I want people to know that from me directly.
They understand.
But if there are other changes,
I didn't know.
that, again, if I get direction to do nothing, we'll do nothing. But I have been given direction that there are problems, and they have not been put on the record today. And I think in all fairness to everybody here, you need to hear all sides of this, the compelling reasons why I think we need changes to this ordinance and why I've been directed to draft them.
Thank you.
So we'll get to that in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. Councilman Coffin wanted to make a comment or ask a question. Don't go too far. Please, Mr. Jerbick, it may be a question for you. Come right back. Mr. Coffin.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I bothered Brad for 2 years, I guess, now on this ordinance to get it drafted and get it out. And I appreciate the fact we're here, and yet we're not done yet, but we've got this on paper finally, and it's exposed to the public, so we hope that now it'll be subject to criticism, and it also at the same time perhaps copying. New York City is now in the throes of this sudden discussion because they made Times Square pedestrian friendly, took the cars off, and now they've got people parading around painted nude. So we have this situation, and men walking around as hot dogs with maybe some mustard on. I think really that kind of stuff is that'll be New York's business, but they may look west for a little description as to what to do. There is the other question raised by Councilman Barlow, and that is something that troubled me, and that is the exploitation of children in some of these acts. I know that, I'm told that this is hard to police because sometimes a person may say, I have the guardianship, or I mean, not the parent, but I've got the permission of the parents. I don't know if it's too late to consider additional work on this bill. I'm inclined to think we should start work on another, which would then address this specifically as it relates to our needs, and that is the need to protect the children and protect them from exploitation. I realize there are child labor laws, but there are other laws relating to how you behave with juveniles and minors. And that is a real concern, because the kids that are out there, I don't know whether to believe them or not if they say that's my daddy or that's my mother or that's my uncle, because they may just be told to say that. And how do you know if they have the free will to say that? So that is a major thing, and I'm glad that the councilman brought it up. And there's other things. We've, with the mayor's permission, we've gone a long way here, and we'll have another big discussion period when we have the final vote on the measures. But I just think that Councilwoman Tarkanian, you're dead wrong. That penis is only 3 feet long, and it is plastic. If it gets too close to me and outside its circle, I'll have some shears handy to trim it down to size.
What
hope
would
it's
we
not
do
real.
without
Thank you very much,
Councilman
Mayor.
Coffin? Good heavens.
Mayor, I'm ready for a motion.
Please do make that.
I would like to move that we obey this item until September 16th, our next scheduled city council meeting. That is the motion. I'll call for the vote.
Thank you. There's a motion. Please vote, and please post. Carries unanimously. And again, I want to thank you all for participating and for waiting and for being so courteous. We really appreciate it. We know we will come to the right solution. Everybody will give a little bit to get there. But thank you all for coming. We have to take a 5-minute, literally 5-minute recess here to reset our equipment according to Mr. Riggleman. So literally 5 minutes. For those of you who are waiting on the next agenda items, our apologies for going so long, but this is so critical to our heartbeat. So 5 minutes, that's the wrong clock. That would be at 1 o'clock sharp. Ms. Fretwell?